and honored to be here with the students. I understand that this is a speaker series that you have, and I was absolutely pleased to be invited here to speak with you. So, a real pleasure. I'm here to tell you that for those of you that work in the IT, and do I need to maybe stay in one corner? Where are the speakers? Where's the feedback coming from?
The speaker is here. Speaker is here.
Okay, so I'll try and stay away from the speaker. Thank you. So I wanted to share with you why I think those of you that work in the and shared service space in particular, your world is going to get disrupted. It is being disrupted. It is going to be dramatically disrupted. I'm also here to tell you that there has never been a better time than now to be an IT professional. Yes, and I realize that those two statements are conflicting, and no, I have not had Fanny this early in the afternoon. Yeah, both those statements are true. And what I'm going to do in today's session is give you examples from my own career and my own life to tell you why you can all be heroes in this digital transformation generation, okay? Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Now, I'm going to start with a couple of videos. I'm going to ask you which of those you would rather have for your own organization.
Welcome to the Automated IT Support Center. Our menu has recently changed. Please listen to all the options before selecting. For email-related issues, please press 1. For printing-related issues, please press 2. For server-related issues, please press 3. For database-related issues, please press 4. For intranet-related issues, please press 29. For website-related issues, please press 30. You can now choose an option from our menu. In your own words, please describe the issue you are experiencing with printing.
I'm unable
You can
to...
start speaking now.
I'm unable to connect.
So you don't have to answer. I know that, if you were the boss of a big company, this is not the kind of service you would like to offer, right? And I know that because in reality, what you'd like to offer is probably something closer to this.
Mon oreille?
Yeah, put it in your ear.
Comme ça?
Yeah.
Ok.
Can you hear me in French?
Pouvez-vous me entendre en français?
Oui. Mais je peux t'entendre parler français. Mais c'est
Yes,
génial.
I can hear you talk French.
Attends, comment ça se fait? C'est
But this is awesome. But how you do it?
Yeah, it's translating. It's translating.
This is not an action. This is actually a real company that provides these services in 3 or 4 languages. By the way, the guy is actually the founder of the company, and the lady there is his girlfriend. And the only reason why he actually created these in-ear language translators is because she was French, and he wanted to talk with her. Okay, so the fact of the matter is these technologies exist. The issue is not whether this is possible. The issue is how do you do that, right? And so it is in that context that I wanted to share the experiences of a lifetime on how do you go about in your day-to-day life, which is hard enough and it's busy and you don't have time to do these kind of things. How do you also change the way you work, change the way that your companies work, right? And that's really a lot of my background. I'll get into introductions a little bit, but this is a real life issue that I faced about 4 years ago. How do you run what is considered to be a best-in-class global operation, shared services globally, but at the same time, how do you disrupt it? How do you make it 10 times better, right? And that really is something that led to the creation of an organization at Procter & Gamble's headquarters in Cincinnati. We brought together the top 5 IT companies, so the HPs, the IBMs, so on and so forth, and also the top 10 venture capitalists and all of their startups together. And each of the boxes there were real-life projects that we worked on. Each of them had to be at least a $50 million size of prize. And by the way, each of them also had to be a 10x improvement. So not a 10%, but a 10 times improvement. And I won't go through all of those right now, but the kind of examples range from the bizarre, like, why should you have travel and expenses in an organization, right? In today's world where there's so much of data, why should you force your employees to document this? All the way through, how can artificial intelligence eliminate the need for invoicing as a process across the whole company, all right? But I realize that I'm jumping the gun and that I probably need to do a little more introductions. So I thought I'd start with myself. Now, I know that in today's day and age, there is a tendency to put a slightly younger version picture of yourself on LinkedIn and Facebook. So that's what I've done here. That is me. I decided to go, with the picture when I was the absolute handsomest in my entire life, right? That was when I was about 2 years old, and it's all been downhill since then. But that's my introduction. I had the incredible opportunity of working with Procter & Gamble for about 27 years and really growing up with the IT and shared services industry. I did my education here in India, and then through Procter & Gamble, I had the opportunity of creating the first ever shared services center in the Philippines in 1993, and then also being the program leader for a really large outsourcing deal with Procter & Gamble in the US. So this was I was talking with Professor Kamath and others about this, a 10-year, $8 billion deal with HP and others. And then some acquisitions and divestitures. I was the interim CIO of the global Gillette company in Boston in 2005. And then I ran IT and global business services in every region of the world before 4 years ago, starting to hit upon a dilemma. And that dilemma is, what happens if your organization and your company is recognized to be best in class in something, but you know in your own heart that that is a little BS because there is still a lot of opportunity. There's so much that you can do to improve, right? So what do you do? How do you create the future? And that's really, the 25 projects that I was talking about, and that's the story that I'd like to share with you, okay? I thought the way I would do this is I would give you a little bit of backstory on what happened and how did we go about creating, all of those crazy project ideas. But then more importantly for you, I want to kind of go in and say, why is this contradiction that I was talking about? Your world is about to be dramatically disrupted, while at the same time, there has never been a better time on earth to be an IT and technology professional. Why both of those are true. And that's really where I want to spend most of my time. And then I'll come back and, with 2 or 3 ideas on, what's my experience and what would I recommend to you, okay? So before I go any further, does that make sense? Yeah? Is it okay? Head nods. Anybody? Yes, ma'am. Excellent. That's good, because I think this story, as you will hear, is equally about what the role of management is to drive digital transformation. Thank you. So I talked about this dilemma of what do you do if you're considered to be best in class, but you really don't feel that you've reached the absolute pinnacle, right? And what we did was we actually went out and we talked to 100 different companies. So venture capitalists, peer companies, consultancies, the McKinseys, and so on and so forth. And then it really dawned on us why we still felt like this was not good enough. Because in reality, for most large companies, the real competition today is not another large company. It is the startup, right? And if that's the case, then if you keep benchmarking yourself with other large companies and saying, we are making more profit than Unilever or Nestle, or we're more efficient than them, that is meaningless. You're kidding yourself. Because the people that will disrupt you will be the startups. And so that's who you have to benchmark yourself. So that's really what led us to create this organization, which we call Next Generation Services. And just to kind of step back and provide all of this into context, I thought I'd quickly give you a framework that we developed. So in many of these large companies, where you kind of sweep together the entire business operation, so not just IT, but finance and marketing and supply chain, and then you create almost like a company within a company that provides these services to the business units. The industry says you go through 3 stages. You start with things like offshoring, right, or outsourcing. The second stage is when you pull all of that together, and you do that for the whole world. And the third stage is when you basically optimize it. And that's where we were at Procter & Gamble about 4 years ago. But then the realization that our real competition was not any of these stage 3 companies, that there had to be a 4th stage, basically led us to say, we have to undo all of the good work we have done over the past 24 years at that time for me, and redo it again. Because the way the startups operate is not the same as the way large companies operate. I will give you an example. So let's say you work in a large company and you have to make a trip from Goa to Bombay, right? What do? You go talk to the travel agency that you're assigned. They will book the tickets for you. You use your cash or your credit card. You come back home. You do your expense reports. Those go to some organization, some back office who will do 3-way expense receipt matching between what you said and what you claimed and cash, and eventually you will get paid, right? And you can do that efficiently. You can outsource it. You can do it very, very rapidly, quickly. Now let's take the example of what happens in a large tech company. If you want to go from Goa to Bombay or Bombay to Goa, you go on a system and you say 3-day trip here to here. The system comes back and gives you a budget number. It says 5,000 rupees. At that time, you are done. You can go stay wherever you want. You can stay with your friend, Airbnb, or the Hyatt. You can book your tickets wherever you want, not just with a travel agency. If you have any expenses that's out of pocket, you use the corporate or company credit card, and that gives you enough data about how you spend the money. So, there is no expense report for you. There is no back office operation. There is no purchasing department that has to do all of those negotiations up front, right? There is no internal audit, because a lot of that's driven by algorithms. That's why you have to redo as stage 4. And that was the big realization that we had about 4 years ago, right? So, with that realization, why is it that you don't see more companies doing this, right? And this is really, something that I wanted to share with you, because the reason most people don't is that your day-to-day job is hard enough that you don't really have additional time to think about, oh my God, what is happening? When am I going to get disrupted, right? Leave alone the resources to go ahead and do that, right? So if my advice to companies these days is, if you're starting from today, what you would do is you would think more like how a startup would think and redesign yourself. I want to give you another small example using a video.
Take a look at this. It's the world's smallest computer. Developed by the University of Michigan, the Micromote can fit on the edge of a nickel. Cubed, it's only 1 millimeter in size. Capable of taking pictures, reading temperatures, and recording pressure, the device is charged and programmed via light.
So this was about 4 years ago. Since then, the research labs at IBM actually generated the next version of this, where and because they are such geniuses at marketing, they decided to call it Tiny Computer, okay? So I was like, is that what all of your marketing genius can come up with? That's the best name, Tiny Computer. But anyway, that's not the main story. We worked with them. And this next version of the world's smallest computer was 0.1 millimeter big. For context, if you pull out one of your hair, and in my case, I can't afford to do that because I don't have enough, but if you do, the thickness of that hair is the size of the computer. But that's not even the crazy thing. The crazy thing is the cost of those. The intended price point was going to be 1 cent, $1 US. Now think in terms of what that would do to your own business model if you put 1 or 2 of these in every bottle of product that you create in the company. The information that it would give you all the way from supplier to whether your advertising is working or what's happening in the landfill as a result of finishing the product is absolutely mind-boggling, okay? This is how the world's changing. And the reason it's changing, and I'm going to get into a few slides for which I apologize up front, because I know that most of you are already aware of this information, but I want to come back and connect the dots later. But the reason why this is happening is because of this famous chart, which you're familiar with, I'm sure. It's Moore's law that says the price performance doubles every 18 months, right, in terms of computing, right? And you're familiar with this, but I want to share a couple of things. In about 5 years, by 2023, you're going to be able to go out and buy for $1,000 US the equivalent of the computing capacity of a human brain. Now again, I'm not talking about an old brain like mine, but I'm talking about young brains like yours, good quality brains. You can go out and buy the computing capacity of a human brain $1,000. The human brain is a marvel of nature, and to be able to go and buy one of those for $1,000, that's disruptive. But that's not even all. Technology doesn't stop there. 20 years from there, you're going to be able to go and buy the computing capacity of all the humans on Earth for $1,000. If you were the CEO of a company, if you were on the board of directors of the company, what would that do to your people strategy, you think? And that's why you see what is happening in the stock market. Today, of the top 5 companies by market valuation in the world, 5 of those companies are tech companies. And by the way, that doesn't even include Amazon or Alibaba, which arguably are tech companies. 8 years ago, there was only one on that list, Microsoft. That is what is happening around us. And by the way, this is changing not IT, but this is changing the way businesses operate. Algorithms drive supply chain planning at fashion retailer Zara, so they can go from designing a new piece of fashion to having that available in the stores in 2 weeks. That is how efficient supply chains are becoming. And by the way, it's not just supply chains. Xiaomi produces new batches of cell phones every week. I'm not talking about new versions of software. You can do 100 releases of new software every day. I'm talking about new batches of phones. This is how research and development is changing. And by the way, it's not just entire functions, but it is industries. Half the jobs in the manufacturing sector are going to be done by robots in the next 12 years. And by the way, it's not just industries, it's also personal capabilities. When you make a lot of money, you go to a financial advisor, and 10% of that financial advice, which is true of my daughters in the US, they actually don't go to a financial advisor, they go to a robot today to get their financial advice. And by the way, the implication of all of this is not in a company, it is in society. Because when you have 24 million people in the US who are going to be less literate than an algorithm, that is going to change mass society. And all of these examples may be caused by technology, but this is not about technology. This is what is called digital disruption. This is what leads us to say, you have to redesign and rethink everything that you know about the world around you. That's why I like to talk to the young, because I think they're smart. Like little Raina there who says, I love you, Bobot, or I love you, robot. They're accepting of technology. No, this is not what I recommend that you do. You don't have to go out and start hugging. By the way, that's not even a robot. That's a water heater. So, I mean, that's okay. That's not the recommendation here. But the whole point is, if technology is changing the world, the extent to which you can make it work for you is driven by whether you're able to embrace it, right? And that's the story. I want to talk to you about the fourth industrial revolution. So, when I was in school, I learned about the industrial revolution. And a few years ago, I heard about the fourth industrial revolution, and I was completely devastated. I said, wait a minute, what happened? Did I go to sleep? When was the second and the third? How do I go from the first industrial revolution to the fourth? Well, trust me, no, this is the fourth. The first industrial revolution was when, society went from, village-based economies to then using steam engines and other kind of stuff. The second was in the early 1900s when, we invented electricity. And the third industrial revolution was only about 20, 30 years ago when the internet changed everything. The fourth industrial revolution is all of the examples that I was talking about earlier, about how industry is changing. The fourth industrial revolution is the application of Moore's law and technology into society, biology, and physical life. The fourth industrial revolution is why you have Uber. The fourth industrial revolution is why in many countries you have societal upheaval. Whether you have Brexit in the UK or our version of that in the US or versions of this even in India, that's because society is changing around us. So it is in that context that I want to define digital transformation. So if you were a company that did very well 10 years ago, now you're suddenly saying, wait a minute, I used to be the leader in banking and finance, and now some startup is coming and eating my lunch. What has happened? That's called digital disruption, where your people, your processes, all of the work that made you successful in the third industrial revolution are the same things that will kill you in the fourth industrial revolution. Digital transformation is how do you rewire yourself from being successful in the third industrial revolution to the fourth. Does that make sense? Digital transformation is not a technology. Digital transformation is not cloud. It is not artificial intelligence. It is not anything that IT companies label, because the minute they call it AI or blockchain or digital transformation, they sell 20% more. Don't get fooled by that. That is not digital transformation. Digital transformation is rewiring the way you work. So despite the industrial revolution, you will win. Yeah. So with that in mind, I started 4 years ago at Procter & Gamble to say, okay, so it's not sufficient for us to be good at what we do. It's not sufficient for us to be even best in class, because the world around us is changing. And then I came across a couple of examples that really brought that to life. One of them was a tweet from the city of Cincinnati, which is where I live, and you can read the tweet there. This was, I think, in like 2015, where this was from the police department, which tweeted out, there was a shooting in Avondale, which is one of the localities in Cincinnati, and the victim lied until they were confronted with ShotSpotter. Now, ShotSpotter is an AI technology that can tell you in real time whenever a shot is fired in the city, and it can automatically send the police there. Okay? So it's pretty cool, and I realize that. It's used in London, in New York, and many other places. But I live in Cincinnati. Cincinnati is like Saligaon in Goa. For Cincinnati to have artificial intelligence be used by cops was totally mind-boggling, right? So that really drove the perception that this is not business as usual. There was one other example that I wanted to share with you. As I said, I went and talked to 100 different companies, and one of the companies I was trying to get in touch with, the CEO of that company, AJ Wanolo, he and I were exchanging emails on when are you available, I'm not available this week, next week, so on and so forth. And this is, typical stuff. And you can read the email there, and eventually AJ says, okay, fine, I will ask Amy to set something up. And I assumed Amy was his admin, right? And you can see the email from Amy saying, hey, happy to get something on AJ's calendar, are all of these dates okay? Which I know is a very boring story until you click on X.AI, which is below Amy's name, and that is a robot. So Amy was a robot. Read the email again. Perfectly good English. Secondly, when I said I am out next week, on the 10th of April, none of the options that Amy generated were for the week that I was out. When you think about the ultimate in personal service, personalized service, the admin of a big CEO is probably one of the most sensitive services. And here, by the way, in 2015, is an example of that being done by a robot. This is not business as usual. And that's where I created this organization that I talked about, where we ran about 25 different projects, everything from, when you run a global company, you have outsourced some of your infrastructure, you have plants in Nigeria, you have telecoms providers in China, and so many things can break. And earlier on we were talking about when you outsource it, you have so many debates on whose fault is it. And so the idea, the second row, the second item there was, fine, can we actually have global self-healing infrastructure? Because whenever you have a telecoms router, it is a digital device. Whenever you have a server, it's a digital device. When you have software, it's a digital device. When you have power, it's a digital device. And before any of these break, they actually always give you signals. And you could put each of those signals into a very large database, and you could have AI predict. And half those cases, you can actually self-heal them, right? And that was the project that we ran successfully. Okay. Let's take another example. Let's take end-to-end planning. If any one of you work in the manufacturing or the supply chain area, you're probably familiar with MRP2 or ERP. Supply chain planning from supply to customer is still run in a 1960s methodology where you basically take demand forecasting, demand planning, manufacturing planning, transportation, and you run each of those in silos. But yet, in today's world, if I took a picture right now of us and I put it on LinkedIn, LinkedIn has AI that would know exactly who your friends are, how important this is, where to rank it. It is able for 1 trillion transactions a month to optimize in real time. I don't care how complex your supply chain is, but you don't deal with 1 trillion transactions a month. You can run your supply chains better than SAP can tell you today, right? And that's the experiment that we ran successfully on one of the P&G businesses. And then we actually gave that intellectual property to SAP because P&G is not a software development shop, and said, okay, we know this works, go put it into your product, and we will gain share the results, okay? So I'll give you just one other example, because I know you're not interested in P&G stories, you're more interested about how do I become a hero? So I'll just give you one more, and then we'll come back to the more important question. Let's take accounts receivables. So I know accounts receivables is not a very sexy job, right? And then claims management in accounts receivables is one of those that's not very exciting either, because what happens is, if you're a large company like P&G, you sell to a retailer for 1,000 rupees, but maybe the retailer only pays you 900 rupees. And then you say, well, what happened here? They said, well, we asked for 10 cases, we only got 9. And then there is a long debate between their accounts payable organization and your accounts receivables organization on who is correct. That's called claims management. We found an AI with a couple of people that were running a startup in Silicon Valley that could take each of those claims as they come in and real time decide with more accuracy than the 400 people that we have working globally at Procter & Gamble on which of those claims was better. So these are some of the examples of how you could run a business differently using technology in the fourth industrial revolution. So as I said, I know this is all cool, but that's really not, what you'd like to hear. What you'd like to hear is, okay, so what do I do? Where do I start, right? And the answer will obviously be extremely personal to, what your role is and what you're looking for doing and things like that. But I thought I'd leave you with 3 ideas that as each of you, whether you're students or professors or industry people, as you then apply some of this thinking to business, when you do run whatever your business is, whether it's teaching or industry, that you really should keep in mind, yeah? The first is, and this is really why I gave you all of that context and examples, you really have to envision the possibilities. If you are not even aware that you're in the midst of an industrial revolution, and that you have to think much bigger than you did 5 years or 10 years ago, then that's already a challenge for most people, right? So the first piece of advice that I'd like to leave with you is think much bigger than anything that you have been told by experts, by your teachers, by your parents, because the possibilities are actually much bigger. They're much, much grander than anything that you can imagine, I promise you. The second, when you do start to get into any of these big ideas, the first problem that you're going to run into is, yeah, but I have no time. I already have a busy life, or I have no money. I have only so many funds available, whether you're a student or whether you're running a department. How am I going to spend time and money learning all of this crazy stuff, right? And this is where I want to share with you this framework that I picked up from Google called 70-20-10. At Google, 70% of all of the capacity in the company is used to run day-to-day operations. 20% is on continuous improvement. So that was the next version of Gmail or something like that. And 10% is in this organization called Google X. And also in each of these operating organizations on how to disrupt myself. These are the organizations that lead to the driverless car or the balloon internet or these, retina glasses that can tell you whether you're diabetic or, your sugar levels are running low. Now, you don't have to spend 10% of your budget or your time doing that third activity. But what I'm here to tell you is that you have to have those 3 buckets. You have to have a bucket of how much do I use to run my day-to-day? The second bucket of how do I improve it by 10%? And the third bucket of how do I eliminate it? How do I disrupt it? At P&G, we didn't spend 10% of our GBS budget of $2 billion on the work that I described. We spent less than 1%. And the way we did that is when I created this ecosystem, the next generation services, I invited IBM and HP and TCS and Infosys and said, I will open P&G as a playing ground for you to play. I will connect you with some of the best venture capitalists and the startups. I will use my people's expertise to imagine, using design thinking, how you can disrupt these capabilities. You bring in your people and your software, for which I will not pay you, and you will translate that into software. If you're successful, I will give you that intellectual property and that software to sell to the world. Because I, P&G, am not a software company. But if you can go to the world and say, I did a 10 times improvement on the best in class in the world, that piece of software is going to be worth billions for you, right? And that's just an example. You can think of what is the equivalent of that example in your day-to-day life. How could you use the ecosystem instead of your money to actually do most of the hard work? Which is really my next slide here as well.
Over 350 teams from around the globe submitted to enter. 10 were selected to bring their technology to compete. Every single one a fresh idea. And the best of the best earns a $1 million prize.
So the context of this is as follows. You guys, some of you, because I know there's some very young people here, may remember in about 10 years ago, when there was a really big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the BP oil rig, was on fire for many, many, many days. Yeah, and none of the oil companies could figure out how to stop that. So they did what you see here on the video is an X Prize, which is they open this challenge to the whole world and say the first person or company that comes up with the idea to fix this, we're going to give them $1 million, right? There is a company, a small company that won that challenge. The two people in the company that came up with the idea to plug the BP oil well in the Gulf of Mexico, one of those persons was a dentist. The second person was a tattoo artist. Neither of those were oil specialists. The reason you have to make your ecosystem work for you is because your current experts are too invested in the ways that the world works today. Your real disruption is going to come from those dentists and tattoo artists. Apparently there was something about, liquid and oil flow or liquid dynamics that they may have learned through their dentistry or their tattoo artist that made them come up with the idea to plug the oil spill, right? Put your ecosystem to work. They don't have to be experts. They just have to be creative enough. So, to summarize, whatever it is you do, whether it is preparing for next week's exam or running a company, distinguish your 10 from the 20, leverage your ecosystem highly, and then set up an idea of disruptions, not just one or two big ideas, because you want to go through and test a lot of them and kill most of them, right? But then that's not all. There's one more thing, which is, in my experience of over 30 years, 70% of those digital transformations still fail. And that is, what leads me here to Goa and the book that I've written. The reason why, even when you come up with those big ideas, 70% of them fail, is because of a lack of discipline. Discipline in being clear of what is digital transformation. It is not technology, it is reimagination. and discipline in execution. Executing digital transformation is not executing an IT software upgrade project. It is about change management, changing humans and technology along with each other, right? And that's, some of the content of the book. But the reason I wanted to be here in person and share all of this with you is because if you can have the most sensitive job in the world, the admin assistant of a CEO being done by robots, if you can have artificial intelligence that can tell you whether a claim is valid or not, if you can have robots do camel racing in the Middle East, then each of you really, really smart people can definitely be the next Elon Musk, right? I'm convinced of that. I really am. And no, I wasn't joking about robots doing camel racing in the Middle East. Here's a video of that.
Camel racing is an ancient tradition in the Arab world, but mechanical jockeys used today have only been around for a decade or so. The jockeys weigh about 6.5 pounds. They come equipped with a walkie-talkie so the camel can take directions, and a small whip, which is activated by a remote control.
I thought I'd share some of this, and then we'll spend a few minutes on Q&A. Make sense? All right, what do you guys think? Is this something that resonates? Is this something that is plausible? Yeah, I see some heads nodding. I think there's a mic in there. Yes, okay.
So I have a question actually regarding.
Yes.
You mentioned about robots taking place of humans when it comes to production and other facilities, right? So whenever a company starts up, they add to social value to to the people around by providing jobs and all. Wouldn't it influence them in a negative way? Because you will create a lot of unemployment that way. Aside from that, there are other factors also involved in this. There is government intervention and all of these other factors influencing. So how you as a company who will introduce these new robots to this particular firm tackle that issue?
I think that's a perfect setup for a lot of why I had to write the book on why digital transformations fail, because digital transformations are less about digital and they're more about transformation. And that is about people. So how do you go to somebody who's working on the shop floor and say, hey, can you come up with an idea of having a robot do your work, right? That just doesn't work that way. But I think that if you do this right, it is possible to do this transformation successfully and also in a win-win manner with the people that work for you. I want to give you a couple of examples of companies. I read just 2 weeks ago that Amazon is going to invest $700 million to retrain 100,000 of its own employees. Now, Amazon is probably one of the best technical companies in the world. Amazon is one of the most innovative companies in the world for sure. And when they say they have to retrain their people and they're going to spend $700 million on that, you start to say, oh, wait a minute, right? But as it turns out, it is possible to make this win-win because your people, even if they're successful today, they're not going to be successful 2 years or 4 years later, and you can actually help them to be successful in the future, whether that is in a job in Amazon or maybe in a job outside Amazon, and to do it better, right? And there are companies and governments that do this extremely well. There are, in Latvia, Lithuania, and parts of Finland, they have taken most of the work of government agencies and they have digitized it extremely successfully. And they've reinvested some of that money into giving social safety nets and other income to their citizens, right? But to do all of that, you have to look at digital transformation and the fourth industrial revolution as an opportunity, not a threat. Because when you look at it as a threat, you do nothing. And when you do nothing, you go bankrupt. And then all of the people that work for you end up being unemployed anyway, right? So you're much better off investing $700 million in your people than letting them, be out on the streets, right? And that's why I think it's possible to be win-win. That's a very good question. Thank you. Yes, I've had, I will admit, not a lot of experience in India, but I've had the opportunity to work with one public sector and one private sector company, which unfortunately I cannot give the details. But I've looked at the vision of what they're doing. And their vision is as ambitious, if not more ambitious, than any of the big companies that I've worked with in Europe or the US. One of those companies is a relatively small company in product distribution, actually from imported product into, mom and pop stores, Kirana stores. And they're using digital technology to be able to do that and educate not just their people, but their families, and even give them free housing by improving the transactions that they are able to do at minimal cost. And I think that's fantastic. Another is a public sector utility that is now starting to look at how can technology basically disrupt them. How do they, become not needed as a result of digital technology? And their goal, by the way, is not to commit suicide. Their goal is basically to figure out how they can add next generation value by taking some of the work that they do and making it redundant. So, so those are just two data points. I don't feel like I'm qualified to talk about the state of the industry here, but I suspect that, as in most other countries, you will have people on the early adopters that, those the examples that I gave you, and you'll have people at the end. And the work that we can do is to make that big middle, fall more into the early adopter category. And that's really what I hope to do. So. All right. So if there's no further questions, I want to take the opportunity to firstly thank you for being here. Secondly, hope that some of these experiences make you sit up and think a little bit about how your future can be big, how you can all be a hero in the fourth industrial revolution. And thirdly, I want to wish you guys a very good weekend. Thank you very much.